George Washington's toughest decision came in 1794 when farmers in western Pennsylvania refused to pay a federal tax on whiskey. Washington didn't want to look like a tyrant, sending troops against his own people, especially after just fighting a revolution over that very thing. So he tried negotiation first, hoping it would end peacefully. But when talks failed, he led nearly 13,000 militia himself to show the Constitution had real authority. It wasn't a move he made lightly, but he believed backing down would be worse in the long run. John Adams was under pressure. France was threatening U.S. ships, and people at home were freaking out about foreign spies and criticizing the government. His Federalist allies in Congress passed laws to crack down, making it harder for immigrants to stay and easier to punish critics. Adams didn't love these laws, and he knew they conflicted with free speech, but he signed them anyway, trying to keep the country from falling apart. The backlash was huge and likely cost him re-election. Thomas Jefferson believed a president should stick to what the Constitution explicitly allowed, and buying land wasn't in there. But in 1803, France suddenly offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory. Jefferson hesitated. He thought it might be unconstitutional, and he worried about being called a hypocrite. But the deal was too good to pass up. It doubled the size of the U.S. for cheap. It secured the Mississippi River, and it opened up the West. In the end, he made the Louisiana Purchase. For years, Britain had been blocking U.S. trade and taking American sailors. James Madison tried different tactics, embargoes, negotiations, but nothing worked. Going to war was risky. The U.S. military was small at the time, and the country was divided. Not everyone thought it was a good idea, but Madison believed if he didn't act, the U.S. would keep getting pushed around. The war ended up costing a lot and even resulted in the burning of the White House. But for Madison, backing down would have meant surrendering American independence. When Missouri applied to become a state, it set off a major fight. Allowing it in as a state that legalized the enslavement of people would upset the balance in Congress. Some wanted to block it entirely, and others threatened secession if it didn't go through. President James Monroe's advisors were split, along with the rest of the country. After months of debate, Congress came up with a compromise. Missouri would come in as a state that allowed the enslavement of people. Maine would come in as a free one, and the practice would be banned in new northern territories. Monroe signed it, knowing it would only delay a much bigger fight. John Quincy Adams had a big vision: roads, canals, schools, and even a national observatory. He thought the federal government should lead the way in building a modern country. But most of Congress didn't agree. They thought it was overreach. Adams kept pushing anyway, knowing he was alienating allies and hurting his chances of re-election. He believed deeply in the projects, but almost all of them were blocked. His choice to stay the course must have been a difficult one, and made his presidency frustrating and short-lived. When South Carolina said it wouldn't follow a federal tariff law and hinted at secession, Andrew Jackson was in a tough spot. He hated the tariff himself and was a firm believer in states' rights, but he also thought disobeying federal law was dangerous. He sent troops to enforce the law while also supporting a new, lower tariff to ease tensions. It was a balancing act. Crack down too hard and you risk war, or go too soft and you lose control. Jackson had to draw the line carefully. After the economy collapsed in 1837, people were desperate for relief. Martin Van Buren stuck to his principles. He didn't want the government bailing out banks or flooding the system with easy money. Instead, he pushed for a separate treasury system where federal money would be tied to private banks. He believed it was the right move long term, but it didn't help struggling Americans in the short term. The choice cost him support and may have cost him re-election. William Henry Harrison was president for just 31 days before succumbing to pneumonia. He spent most of that time arguing with Henry Clay, the Whig Party leader, about who would really set policy. Harrison made it clear he was president, and he'd make the calls, not Clay. But before he could follow through on anything else, he got sick and his life ended shortly thereafter. His term was really too short for a major decision to unfold. After getting kicked out of the Whig Party, John Tyler didn't have much political support left. He knew that pushing for Texas annexation could start a war with Mexico and stir up tensions over enslaving people. His cabinet was split, and Congress had already rejected his first treaty. But Tyler saw Texas as key to expanding the U.S. and kept pushing. He eventually bypassed the Senate and got it done through a joint resolution. It was controversial, but he stuck with it to the end of his term. James K. Polk wanted California, and he believed the U.S. had a right to expand west. When Texas joined the Union, he sent troops to the disputed border, hoping to provoke a response. Mexico did respond with an attack, and Polk asked Congress to declare war. The U.S. won and gained a massive amount of land, but Polk knew all along that expansion would raise one big question. Would the enslavement of people be allowed in the new territories? That decision wasn't his directly, but the war made it unavoidable and helped push the country closer to civil war. Zachary Taylor was a slaveholder, but once he became president, he didn't want the practice to spread into new Western territories. That put him at odds with many Southerners. When they threatened to leave the Union over California applying as a free state, Taylor said he'd send an army to stop them, even if it meant fighting his own section of the country. It was a bold move that shocked his base. However, he passed away suddenly before the crisis was resolved. After Taylor's passing, Millard Fillmore took over and backed the Compromise of 1850, hoping to calm things down. One part of the deal was the Fugitive Slave Act, which required escaped individuals to be returned, even from free states. Fillmore didn't love it, but he enforced it anyway, thinking it was necessary to hold the country together. Northern outrage was immediate. He lost support from his party and among voters who had once backed him. Franklin Pierce hoped to quiet the debate around enslaving people, not inflame it. But when Congress brought forward a bill letting new territories vote on the issue, even in areas where it had already been banned, he backed it. Some of his advisors warned it would be a disaster. He signed it anyway, trying to keep his party unified. Instead, the law led to violence in Kansas and split the country even further. Pierce never recovered politically. When Kansas applied for statehood, pro-enslavement leaders pushed through a constitution that didn't reflect the majority's will. James Buchanan supported it anyway, thinking it would settle the issue quickly. But it went against the party's popular sovereignty stance and sparked a fight with Northern Democrats like Stephen Douglas. Buchanan's decision deepened the divide inside his own party and across the country, just as tensions were boiling over. Abraham Lincoln didn't start the Civil War to exclusively end slavery. His main goal was saving the Union. But as the war dragged on, he saw emancipation as a military and moral turning point. He worried it would push border states away and divide Northern support. But he wanted a Union victory, so he made the announcement. It didn't free all enslaved people, but it changed the war's purpose. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all enslaved people, but it changed the war's purpose and became a defining document in America's history. After Lincoln's untimely passing, Andrew Johnson wanted to bring the South back into the Union quickly, with minimal punishment. But Congress, especially radical Republicans, wanted stricter terms and protections for freed people. Johnson vetoed key bills and clashed constantly with lawmakers. He thought it was honoring Lincoln's vision, but his actions enraged Congress and led to his impeachment. The battle over how to rebuild the South became a personal and political war. When the economy crashed in 1873, Farmers and workers begged for help, especially more paper money to ease debt. Congress passed a bill to inflate the currency. Ulysses S. Grant was torn. He knew people were struggling, but he also believed inflation would hurt long-term stability. He vetoed the bill, siding with sound money over short-term relief. The move divided his party and made the Depression worse, but he stuck to what he thought was right. The 1876 election was a mess. Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote, and the election results were disputed. To break the deadlock, he agreed, through back-channel deals, to withdraw federal troops from the South if Democrats accepted his win. He got the presidency, but ending Reconstruction meant black voters and officials in the South were left without protection. Hayes knew it would lead to setbacks for civil rights, but he believed restoring peace was the only way forward. James A. Garfield came into office during a battle over federal jobs. Party leaders expected him to hand out positions to loyalists. Garfield resisted. He wanted civil service reform and refused to cave to pressure. That decision cost him politically, and, tragically, it may have cost him his life. He was shot by a man angry about not getting a government post. Garfield lingered for weeks before eventually losing his life, and his passing pushed Congress to finally act on reform. Chester A. Arthur had spent his whole career benefiting from the spoils system, getting jobs through political connections. But after President Garfield was assassinated by someone angry about not getting a job, political pressure for reform exploded. Arthur shocked everyone. Instead of protecting the old system that helped him rise, he backed the Pendleton Act, which required merit-based hiring for federal jobs. It was against his past, his allies, and his image, but he did it anyway. During Grover Cleveland's second term, the country was deep in a depression. Many Democrats wanted to pump more silver into the economy to ease debt and raise prices. But Cleveland stuck to the gold standard, believing it would keep currency stable. He knew that farmers and laborers wouldn't like it, but he wouldn't back down. His party split over the issue, and it helped lead to a Republican landslide in the next election. Benjamin Harrison wasn't a radical, but he saw how massive trusts were swallowing up competition. When Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, it wasn't clear how it would work or how far it would go. Business leaders were nervous, and some in Harrison's own party wanted to hold off. He signed it anyway. It was a gamble. He risked alienating industrial backers, but he believed the government needed to set limits on monopoly power. After the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, the press and Congress demanded war with Spain. William McKinley, a Civil War veteran, didn't want to rush into conflict. He tried to find a peaceful way out, but the pressure was overwhelming. In 1898, he finally asked Congress for a war declaration. The U.S. won quickly and gained overseas territories, but McKinley knew he'd crossed into imperialism, something he hadn't planned on and wasn't entirely comfortable with. When coal miners went on strike for better pay and hours, mine owners refused to negotiate. Winter was coming and the country was facing a fuel shortage. Theodore Roosevelt was caught between siding with labor or big business. Instead of taking sides, he brought both to the White House and threatened to use the army to take over the mines. It was a bold move. No president had ever done anything like it, and it risked angering powerful industrial allies. But it worked. William Howard Taft had been handpicked by Roosevelt, but once in office, he started charting his own course. One of the biggest breaks came when he allowed the government to sue U.S. Steel, even though Roosevelt had supported its formation. Taft believed the law had to apply equally to all trusts, but the move enraged Roosevelt. Their falling out split the Republican Party and helped the Democrats win in 1912. Woodrow Wilson ran for re-election in 1916, promising to keep the U.S. out of war. But when Germany resumed unrestricted submarine attacks, And the Zimmerman telegram revealed a threat to the U.S. Wilson changed course. Asking Congress to declare war in 1917 wasn't easy. He knew it meant years of bloodshed and uncertainty. He had hoped to stay neutral, but ultimately decided the U.S. couldn't stand by. It redefined his presidency and America's role in the world. Eugene V. Debs had run against Warren G. Harding in 1920 from prison, where he was serving time for opposing the draft during World War I. After taking office, Harding faced a tough choice: keep Debs locked up to appease conservatives, or let him go and risk looking soft. Harding chose to commute his sentence. He said it was time for healing. He even invited Debs to the White House. The decision upset many in his own party, but showed Harding was willing to move past old battles. Calvin Coolidge was popular and could have easily won another term in 1928, but after his teenage son suddenly passed away in 1924, Coolidge changed. He became more withdrawn and quietly decided not to run again. He didn't explain much, but the loss clearly shook him. Politically, it was an easy win to pass up. Personally, it was a sign that he no longer had the heart for the job. He walked away at the peak of his popularity. When the Great Depression hit, Herbert Hoover was already under pressure to protect American jobs. Congress passed a massive tariff bill to raise taxes on imported goods. Hoover didn't like it. Economists warned it would make things worse, and he agreed. But politically, vetoing it could split his party. He signed it, hoping it would calm things down. Instead, it triggered a trade war and deepened the crisis. Hoover later admitted it was a mistake, but by then the damage was already done. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, military officials pushed Franklin Delano Roosevelt to authorize the removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Some of his advisors objected. It wasn't based on any real evidence, but public fear was high, and many politicians were demanding action. FDR signed Executive Order 9066, which led to over 100,000 people being forcibly relocated and held in camps. It went against American values, but he saw it as a national security move during wartime, and he never publicly second-guessed it. Harry S. Truman had only been president for a few months when he was told the U.S. had developed a powerful new weapon. Japan hadn't surrendered, and a land invasion could cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But using the atomic bomb meant killing civilians on a massive scale. Truman gave the order anyway, first on Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. Japan surrendered days later. He stood by the decision, but knew it was unlike anything a president had ever done before. In 1957, Arkansas's governor blocked 9 black students from attending a public high school. Eisenhower didn't want to use federal force in a state's backyard, but a court had ordered the school to integrate. When the state refused to comply, Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne to protect the students. It wasn't a move he took lightly. He worried it would deepen racial tensions, but he decided the law had to be enforced, no matter how unpopular it was with the South. When spy planes found Soviet missiles in Cuba in 1962, John F. Kennedy faced an impossible choice: strike quickly and risk nuclear war, or wait and try diplomacy. His military advisors wanted an airstrike. Kennedy held back, choosing a naval blockade instead. For 13 tense days, the world stood on edge. Behind the scenes, he traded U.S. missiles in Turkey to get the Soviets to back down. He was praised for avoiding disaster, but the weight of that decision never left him. Lyndon B. Johnson inherited Vietnam, but he made it his own. After a disputed attack on U.S. ships, he got broad war powers from Congress. Advisors warned that pulling out could make the U.S. look weak in the Cold War. Johnson kept sending more troops, over 500,000 by 1968, even though he privately doubted they could win. He knew the war was unpopular, but feared the consequences of leaving. The decision consumed his presidency and drove him not to run again. After the Watergate break-in, Richard Nixon tried to cover it up. As evidence piled up, especially the White House tapes, his support in Congress collapsed. Facing near certain impeachment, Nixon chose to resign in August 1974. He was the first and only president to do so. It was a humiliating end, especially for someone who'd built his career on toughness and survival. Stepping down meant admitting political defeat, but dragging it out could have torn the country apart even more. Just a month after Nixon resigned, Gerald Ford granted him a full pardon. He didn't run it by Congress or the Justice Department. He just did it. Ford said he wanted to heal the country and move on, but people were furious. Many thought it was part of a backroom deal. His approval ratings tanked, and it likely cost him the 1976 election. Still, Ford never took it back. He seemed to believe that dragging Nixon through more legal battles would only keep the wound open. In 1979, Iranian militants stormed the U.S. Embassy and took 52 American hostages. Jimmy Carter tried diplomacy for months, but nothing worked. Eventually, he authorized a risky rescue mission involving helicopters, ground teams, and secret landings in the desert. The operation failed. 2 aircraft crashed, and 8 U.S. servicemen lost their lives. The hostages weren't rescued, and the failure crushed Carter politically. He made the call knowing the risk, but hoping to bring them home. They weren't freed until the day he left office. Ronald Reagan had promised never to deal with terrorists or pay ransom, but then came Iran-Contra. His team secretly sold weapons to Iran, hoping it would help free American hostages in Lebanon. The money was then used to fund rebels in Nicaragua, despite a congressional ban. When the story broke, Reagan first said he didn't know. Later, he admitted he had approved the arms deal. The scandal nearly led to impeachment. It went against everything he said and stood for, but he let it happen anyway. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, George H.W. Bush had to decide whether to send U.S. troops into another war in the Middle East. Some advisors warned it could spiral into a bigger conflict. Others pushed to go further and remove Saddam Hussein altogether. Bush chose a limited mission, force Iraq out of Kuwait, but stop short of toppling the regime. It was a carefully measured choice, militarily successful but politically risky. And he knew leaving Saddam in power might cause future problems. When news broke about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton denied it, publicly and under oath. As the investigation grew, evidence piled up. Eventually, he admitted to misleading the public and lying during a deposition. That decision, first to deny, then to come clean, put his presidency at risk. It led to impeachment, wrecked his personal reputation, and divided the country. Clinton faced enormous pressure from both sides, but the fallout came from a choice he made himself. After the September 11th attacks, George W. Bush launched the war in Afghanistan to target al-Qaeda. But less than 2 years later, he expanded the fight to Iraq, claiming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Intelligence was shaky and many allies were against it. Bush moved forward anyway. Saddam was overthrown, but the weapons were never found. The war dragged on for years, costing lives and money. It was the most controversial decision of his presidency. In 2011, U.S. intelligence tracked a man they believed was Osama bin Laden to a compound in Pakistan. The evidence wasn't solid. If Barack Obama ordered the raid and it failed, the result would be disastrous. Some advisors wanted to bomb the site, but Obama chose a secret Navy SEAL mission. The team succeeded. Bin Laden was taken out, and the SEALs made it out. It was a huge moment, but the decision to greenlight it was a gamble with global consequences. In the first months of the pandemic, Donald Trump got warnings from health officials that a major outbreak was coming, but he worried that sounding the alarm would hurt the economy and create panic. For weeks, he downplayed the virus in public, even as other officials were urging action. Later, he supported vaccine development and signed emergency relief bills. but critics say his decision to delay things made the situation worse. It was a hard call between public health and economic fears, and it was a defining moment in his last year of office. Joe Biden had long supported pulling out of Afghanistan, and in 2021, he finally ordered it. Military leaders warned the Afghan government might not hold once U.S. troops left. They were right. Within weeks, the Taliban took over, Kabul fell, and a rushed evacuation followed. A bombing took out 13 U.S. troops. Biden said the war had to end, but the chaos of the situation was shocking. It was a decision he'd defended for years, but carrying it out proved far messier than expected. I'd love to hear your take on these decisions. Would you have made the same ones? Or where did these presidents just get it wrong? And if you liked the video, give us a like, it really helps the channel. And there's another video on your screen right now about US presidents, so please check that one out too. See you next time.